17-year-old Emily Carter thought she had found love with her 19-year-old boyfriend, Ryan Miller. But when she discovered that her own mother, Sandra Carter, was secretly pregnant with his child, the betrayal ignited a rage so intense it ended in 13 gunshots and a community left in shock. 17-year-old Emily Carter lived in a small, sunlit town where nothing much ever seemed to happen. Her life appeared ordinary from the outside, the kind of quiet routine that neighbors admired. She was a bright student at the local high school, known for her sharp mind and gentle nature. Her mother, Sandra, raised her on her own after her father left when she was young. Sandra was hardworking and devoted, juggling 2 jobs to make sure her daughter had everything she needed. To the community, Sandra was a woman to be admired, someone who carried herself with grace even when life was difficult. Inside their modest home, however, things were not as simple as they looked. Emily had been dating Ryan Miller for nearly a year. He was 19, charming, and carried an aura that drew people in easily. Ryan was the kind of boy who could light up a room with his smile and make anyone feel like the center of his attention. To Emily, he was her first real love, someone who promised her a future beyond the town's small boundaries. He visited often, spending evenings at the Carter house, sharing dinner with Sandra and Emily, sometimes helping with chores, sometimes lounging in the living room with them. It felt natural at first, a young couple being supervised by a protective mother, but as weeks turned into months, the lines between family and outsider blurred. Sandra had always seemed to like Ryan. She laughed at his jokes, asked about his plans, and complimented his ambitions even when others dismissed him as unfocused. To Emily, this was a sign that her mother approved of her choice, that Sandra finally saw someone who could take care of her daughter. But what Emily never considered was that Sandra's warmth was more than approval. It was a dangerous closeness that neither of them could have imagined would lead to betrayal. The first signs were subtle, small moments that escaped Emily's notice. Ryan would linger in the kitchen when Sandra cooked, offering to chop vegetables or keep her company. Sandra would dress more carefully on the evenings he came over, wearing perfumes she hadn't touched in years. Their conversations carried an undercurrent Emily was too blinded by love to hear. Late at night, when Emily was upstairs finishing her homework, Sandra and Ryan would still be talking downstairs, their voices low, blending with the hum of the television. To Emily, this was nothing unusual. She believed her mother simply cared for Ryan as part of the family. The truth was far more complicated. Sandra had begun confiding in Ryan in ways she never did with her daughter. She spoke about her loneliness, about how hard it had been to raise a child alone, about how she had given up her own dreams. Ryan, with his easy charm, listened intently, making her feel seen for the first time in years. What began as simple conversations grew into something forbidden, fueled by secrecy and temptation. Emily remained blissfully unaware. She dreamed of finishing school, going to college, and maybe starting a new life with Ryan by her side. Every time she looked at him, she saw hope for the future. Every time she looked at her mother, she saw a woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her. She never suspected that the 2 most important people in her life were slowly weaving a web of deceit behind her back. The house itself began to hold an invisible tension. When all 3 sat together for dinner, Sandra's glances lingered on Ryan longer than a mother's should. Ryan's laugh came a little too easily when Sandra teased him. Emily, caught in the middle, smiled innocently, not realizing that she was already losing both of them in ways that would soon shatter her world. What began as simple kindness had grown into something that could no longer be hidden. Emily thought her life was steady, filled with love and trust. In reality, the foundations of that trust were already crumbling. She was living in a home where betrayal quietly grew in the shadows, waiting for the day it would finally reveal itself and destroy everything she believed in. It was a late afternoon when the first crack in Emily's world began to show. She had come home early from school, her books tucked under her arm, ready to collapse on her bed after a long day. As she walked through the hallway, she heard her mother's voice drifting from the kitchen. It was hushed low, almost as if Sandra didn't want anyone else to hear. Emily stopped, curiosity catching her before she turned the corner. She leaned closer, careful to keep quiet. The words she heard froze her in place. Sandra was whispering into the phone, her tone filled with both fear and excitement. She mentioned an appointment, vitamins, and then a phrase that struck Emily like a blow. I can't believe I'm pregnant." Emily's eyes widened, her heart hammering against her ribs. Pregnant, the thought raced through her mind, leaving her dizzy. But what shattered her most was what came next. Sandra said Ryan's name. Emily stumbled back, her breath shallow, her body trembling. She could barely process what she had just heard. Her boyfriend, the boy she trusted with her heart, had somehow become entangled with her mother. She wanted to believe she had misheard, that it was some cruel misunderstanding. But the way Sandra spoke, the softness in her voice, the intimacy hidden in her words, it told Emily everything she needed to know. That night, Emily lay awake in her bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts in chaos. Images of Ryan with her mother tormented her. She remembered all the little things she had brushed off, the way Sandra dressed differently when Ryan visited, how they shared small jokes she didn't understand, how their eyes sometimes met in ways that made her uneasy, though she never questioned it. Every detail fell into place now, forming a truth she could no longer deny. Days turned into restless nights, and Emily's suspicion only grew. She began paying attention, watching carefully when Ryan came over. She noticed the way he avoided her gaze sometimes, how he lingered when Sandra walked past. One evening, she excused herself to her room earlier than usual, leaving them downstairs. She returned quietly an hour later, moving like a shadow through the house, and what she saw confirmed everything. Ryan was sitting far too close to Sandra on the couch, their voices low, Sandra's hand resting briefly on his arm. It was all she needed to see. The betrayal was no longer hidden. Emily's chest ached with anger and heartbreak. She felt replaced, not just as a girlfriend, but as a daughter. The two people she loved most were sharing a secret that cut her out of their world entirely. Each time she caught a glimpse of their stolen closeness, the fury inside her grew. She couldn't eat, couldn't focus at school, couldn't speak to her friends about what was happening. It was as though her entire life had turned into a cruel joke, and she was the punchline. The moment that sealed it came when Emily found a small packet tucked inside her mother's drawer. Prenatal vitamins hidden under folded clothes. She held them in her hand, her stomach churning, tears blurring her vision. Her mother was truly pregnant with Ryan's child. That night, Emily sat on her bed with the bottle of pills clutched in her palm, her breathing sharp and uneven. The reality was undeniable now. The betrayal wasn't imagined, it was real, and it was growing with every heartbeat of the child her mother carried. Emily felt the ground beneath her collapsing. She wasn't just losing her boyfriend, she was losing her mother. Everything that once gave her comfort now became a source of torment. The betrayal grew heavier with each passing day, until all she could think about was the fire building inside her. It was no longer just heartbreak. It was rage, raw and consuming, waiting for the moment it would spill over. Emily's life began to unravel in ways she could no longer control. What had once been the predictable rhythm of a teenager's world, school, homework, late, night texts with her boyfriend, now felt like a stage play where everyone else knew their lines except her. She wore a mask in public, smiling faintly when friends asked about Ryan, pretending everything was normal when inside she was collapsing. The whispers of betrayal followed her everywhere. At school, she sat at her desk staring blankly at her notes, unable to absorb a single word the teacher said. At night, she tossed and turned, unable to escape the cruel images in her head of her mother and Ryan together. Her anger, once hidden beneath tears, began to harden. She stopped going out with her friends, stopped laughing at the things that once made her happy. The betrayal gnawed at her, consuming her every waking thought. She replayed the phone call she had overheard, the way Sandra's voice softened when she said Ryan's name, the sight of her mother's hand on his arm. Each memory felt like a fresh cut that refused to heal. Pain grew heavier by the day, pressing down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. At home, she could no longer look at either of them without feeling the sting of humiliation. When Ryan visited, she watched them from the corner of her eye, memorizing every small glance, every fleeting smile they shared when they thought she wasn't looking. She began to notice how quickly Sandra defended him in conversations, how she found excuses for his flaws, how she glowed in his presence as if she were the one in love. To Emily, it was unbearable. She had been betrayed not only by a boyfriend, by the very person who was supposed to protect her. The walls of the house became suffocating, every room holding evidence of secrets she wasn't meant to know. One evening, while Sandra was in the shower, Emily slipped into her room. She opened drawers and cabinets, her hands trembling, and found more notes from doctor visits, reminders of appointments, and small receipts that proved the pregnancy was real. The sight of them twisted her stomach, the confirmation pushing her further into darkness. She crumpled the papers in her fist, her face hot with rage, before quickly shoving them back. By now, Emily's mind no longer searched for understanding. She didn't want explanations. She wanted the pain to stop, the betrayal to end, the haunting images to disappear. But the more she tried to bury her emotions, the stronger they became. She began skipping meals, isolating herself in her room for hours, staring at the walls as thoughts of revenge simmered quietly inside her. Her friends asked questions, but she brushed them off with excuses, telling them she was fine. No one could see the storm building inside her. Every time she looked at Ryan, her love for him seemed like a cruel memory, something foolish and naive. Now she saw him as a thief who had stolen not just her heart but her family. And Sandra, the woman she had once admired, became a stranger in her own home. The mother she trusted had chosen betrayal over loyalty, leaving Emily with nothing but anger to hold on to. The boiling point was nearing, though Emily herself could barely recognize it. The fury had settled so deeply inside her that it no longer felt like an emotion. It felt like a part of her, pulsing with every heartbeat. She carried it everywhere, waiting for a moment, a spark that would push her over the edge. It was no longer a question of if she would break, but when. The storm rolled in that evening with heavy clouds and a restless wind, rattling the windows of the Carter house. Rain tapped against the roof in uneven patterns, a sound that seemed to echo the chaos already consuming Emily's thoughts. She sat in her room in complete silence, staring at the small black handgun she had taken from her stepfather's locked cabinet days earlier. Her hands hovered over it, trembling, her reflection in the polished metal distorted but unmistakable. The weight of it was heavier than she imagined, as if it carried the gravity of everything she had endured in the last weeks. Downstairs, Sandra was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a faint smile tugging at her lips as she scrolled through her phone. She had no idea that her daughter was upstairs preparing to end everything. The television hummed faintly in the background, filling the room with a false sense of normalcy. Emily stood in her doorway, listening, her heartbeat pounding in her ears so loudly it drowned out the rain. For a brief moment she hesitated, clutching the gun tighter, wondering if she could really go through with what she was about to do. But the memories of whispered phone calls, stolen glances, and pregnancy vitamins shoved away in drawers filled her mind again, and the hesitation dissolved. Her footsteps down the stairs were slow but deliberate, each one sinking her deeper into a decision she could not undo. The dim light from the living room spilled into the hallway, casting Sandra's silhouette against the glow of the television. Emily paused at the entrance, her figure hidden in the shadows, watching the woman who had been both her protector and her betrayer. She felt her breath quicken, her palms slick with sweat, as the storm outside grew louder, as if the sky itself was waiting for the inevitable. Sandra looked up when she sensed movement, her eyes widening in shock as Emily stepped into the light, the gun gripped firmly in her hands. Time seemed to slow. Emily's vision blurred with tears, but her finger found the trigger as though guided by something far darker than herself. The first shot rang out, shattering the quiet room, and Sandra cried out, her body jerking violently, but Emily did not stop. She fired again and again, each deafening shot echoing through the house, drowning out the storm, drowning out everything but the raw rage that consumed her. By the time the gun fell silent, 13 rounds had torn through the room, and Sandra's body lay motionless on the blood-soaked couch. Smoke lingered in the air, the acrid scent of gunpowder burning Emily's throat as she stared at the destruction she had unleashed. Her chest heaved with uneven breaths, her hands trembling so hard she could barely keep her grip on the weapon. The reality of what she had done sank in slowly, wrapping itself around her like chains she could never escape. The storm raged outside as Emily dropped the gun to the floor with a hollow clatter. The sound echoed through the now silent house. She turned away, her face pale, her eyes hollow, and walked into the darkness of the night. Sandra's once warm and lively home was reduced to a scene of devastation, a crime born from secrets, betrayal, and a daughter's rage that could no longer be contained. The town awoke the next morning to sirens and flashing lights surrounding the Carter residence. Neighbors gathered in their driveways, whispers spreading quickly through the quiet streets. News of Sandra Carter's death traveled faster than the storm that had passed the night before. Police cars lined the block, crime scene tape fluttered in the damp wind, and investigators moved in and out of the small house, carrying evidence bags and cameras. Word of Emily's disappearance spread just as quickly, turning grief into panic. A teenage girl was missing, and she was the prime suspect in her mother's brutal killing. The authorities launched a manhunt, combing through every possible lead. They searched parks, alleys, and abandoned houses. Her photograph was plastered across television screens and social media feeds, her face familiar to classmates and strangers alike. The description painted her as armed, dangerous, and emotionally unstable. For days, the town lived in fear, locking doors early, glancing over shoulders, wondering if the missing teenager might be hiding somewhere close. Emily had been staying with a friend, trying to disappear into the background, but the weight of her actions made hiding impossible. She rarely spoke, ate little, and spent her hours staring blankly at the walls, lost in her own mind. It was not long before someone noticed her unusual behavior and tipped off the police. Within days of the shooting, officers swarmed the small house where she was hiding. The arrest was swift. Emily, pale and hollow-eyed, did not resist when they placed the cold steel handcuffs around her wrists. She was silent as they led her outside, the flashing cameras capturing her face for the world to see. The courtroom that awaited her was packed with journalists, neighbors, and strangers drawn by the horror of the case. The prosecution painted her as a calculating daughter consumed by jealousy, a young woman who could not handle betrayal and chose violence instead. They described in chilling detail the 13 shots, the premeditation involved in stealing the gun, and the coldness of her escape afterward. Each word added weight to the already heavy silence of the room. The defense tried to argue that Emily had acted out of deep emotional turmoil, that she was a teenager pushed to the brink by betrayal too great for her to comprehend. They spoke of her fragile state, her heartbreak, and the toxic dynamics that had unfolded in her home. But the jury's eyes returned again and again to the photographs of Sandra's bloody body, to the evidence of rage that could not be excused. When the verdict was finally read, Emily stood motionless. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. No tears fell, no outburst erupted. She simply lowered her head as if the weight of the words pressed her further into the ground. Ryan sat in the gallery, expression unreadable, his life forever marked by the choices he had made. The story spread far beyond the town's borders, becoming a cautionary tale about betrayal, obsession, and the thin line between love and destruction. Sandra was gone, Emily's life was over, and Ryan was left with scars that could never be erased. What remained was a shattered family, a community haunted by what had unfolded, and the chilling reminder that even the strongest bonds can twist into something deadly when secrets and betrayal take root.